The day the sun refused to shine fully, hiding behind a gray veil of cloud, Nia stood before the final resting place of her mother, Amma. The air felt too still, as though the earth itself mourned. Around her, the villagers paid their respects with bowed heads and whispered prayers, but Nia could hear none of it. All sound was a distant hum beneath the roar of grief in her chest. The shovel in her hand had grown heavy with sorrow, its weight dragging through her limbs as she placed the final mound of earth atop the freshly dug grave. Amma had not simply been her mother. She had been her protector, her teacher, her only source of kindness in a home wrapped in resentment. Once revered as a healer of the highest order, Amma's legacy had long been reduced to whispers, rumors that she had once served royalty, walked among kings and queens, whispered to spirits in sacred gardens. None of that mattered now. What mattered was that Nia was alone. Utterly, devastatingly alone. As the mourners trickled away, leaving only the silence of the forest clearing, Nia knelt beside the grave. Her fingers dug into the dirt, not with the force of burial, but with longing. Her breath trembled. "I don't know what to do without you," she whispered, voice breaking into the wind. The baobab tree overhead rustled, as though responding, though it could offer no comfort. When she returned to the small compound that night, her eyes were raw from crying. The hut she shared with her stepmother and stepsister felt even colder than before. It had never been a home, just a place where she existed, tolerated at best, scorned at worst. As she entered, Kundo barely looked up from her weaving mat, and Zelma sat polishing her nails with a knife. "You should have burned her with the old rags," Kundo muttered without emotion. "What use is burying bones?" Nia didn't respond. She stepped around them quietly and entered her mother's sleeping area, now empty and stripped bare by greedy hands who had already taken the few trinkets worth selling. But one thing remained, hidden beneath a loose floorboard that only Nia knew about. She reached into the hollow, her heart pounding as her fingers brushed against aged leather. It was her mother's diary. Bound in cracked leather, held together by a faded red twine, and sealed with a rusted bronze clasp, the diary seemed to hum with secrets. Nia held it close to her chest, feeling the warmth of it, as if the very essence of her mother still lingered in the pages. It was the last true gift her mother could give her, a piece of herself untouched by the cruelty of others. "What's that?" Zelma's voice sliced through the quiet like a blade. She had appeared at the doorway, eyes narrowing with suspicion. Nia quickly slipped the diary behind her back. "Nothing." "Liar," Zelma hissed. "You're hiding something." Kunto appeared beside her, arms crossed. "Is it gold? Some charm to make her rich?" She pushed past Nia and began searching the room. "It's just a book." Nia cried out. "Please." "It belonged to Mama." Zelma snatched it from her hands before she could react. She turned it over, scoffing at its weathered look. This is what you're crying over? A bunch of dirty old pages from a dead woman? Give it back." Nia reached out, but Kundo caught her arm and yanked her back hard. "You don't own anything here," the stepmother growled. "And don't you go around crying like some cursed child. Your mama's dead. That's the only truth left." Zelma laughed as she examined the clasp. "It's locked. Probably filled with nonsense stories about herbs and leaves. Useless just like she was." They left her there in the empty room, tears streaming silently down her cheeks as they walked off with the diary, tossing it onto the firewood pile as if it were a broken pot. That night, Nia retrieved it once they'd gone to sleep. She dusted off the embers clinging to its surface and cradled it in her lap, whispering soft apologies to her mother's memory. She couldn't open the lock, yet, but she had always known her mother spoke in riddles and secrets. Symbols marked the leather, tiny etchings that seemed to shimmer faintly in the moonlight. One in particular, an emblem like a sun surrounded by thorns, stood out. She had seen it before, once in a dream, and perhaps even on a tapestry that hung in the village council hall. The diary pulsed in her hands, not with magic, but with something deeper. Legacy. Memory. Love. It was more than paper and ink. It was the story of a life that had once meant everything. And now, it was hers to protect. As she lay down that night, holding the diary against her chest beneath her threadbare blanket, Nia made a silent vow: whatever secrets it held, she would uncover them. Her mother's voice would not be lost to ashes and cruelty. Not while she still had breath in her. The morning began like any other, heavy with heat and the dull rhythm of chores that never ended. Nia sat beneath the overhang of the hut's front porch, quietly tracing her fingers along the strange markings on her mother's diary. She still hadn't broken the clasp, but something inside her told her she didn't need to. The answers were in the markings, in the weight of the book itself. Each time she held it, her mother's presence seemed to wrap around her like a shawl, steadying her. Zelma watched her from across the courtyard, her face twisted into the same scowl she wore whenever Nia dared to look content. There was something about Nia's quiet resilience that infuriated her. Zelma was the daughter of the woman who ruled this household, yet it was Nia, motherless Nia, who held something sacred. And that book, that cursed old thing she clutched so protectively, was the final thorn. Still culling that filth like it's worth something? Zelma sneered, storming toward her. Nia rose quickly, tucking the diary into the folds of her cloth, but Zelma was faster. Her hand shot out and snatched it before Nia could react. Zelma, please. Please? Zelma laughed bitterly. Now you beg? When you've been hiding this from us like some spoiled princess? What's inside, Magic? Secrets from the dead? She waved the book mockingly above her head. It's my mother's. Nia cried, lunging toward her, but Zelma stepped back, her face flushing with anger. She was never my mother, she snapped. She always treated you like you were special, and me like I was made of dust. She's gone now. And it's time her nonsense left with her. Nia's stomach dropped. What are you saying? Zelma's eyes gleamed with a vicious light. I'm saying this disgusting book, is going where it belongs. She spun around and stormed toward the hearth pit where the morning fire still simmered with glowing coals. No! Nia screamed. She ran after her, but Kunto emerged from inside the hut and grabbed her by the arm, holding her back. Let her be, Kunto muttered coldly. Maybe then you'll finally stop chasing ghosts. Please! Nia sobbed. Please, I beg you, don't do this. But Zelma didn't hesitate. With both hands, she hurled the diary into the fire. For a moment, there was only the crackle of burning leather and parchment, the hiss of old ink curling into black smoke. Nia collapsed to her knees, screaming so loud the birds scattered from the trees. Her heart tore itself open as she watched the final piece of her mother burn. But then, something shifted. The flames roared higher, too high for so small a fire. The wind around them died. The smoke didn't rise in drifting plumes, but in tight, spiraling columns. The ashes didn't fall, they hovered. The courtyard stilled. Even Kunto let go of Nia's arm as the coals flashed white-hot and a sudden gust blew outward in a perfect circle, flattening the dry grass. And then, above the fire pit, the ashes swirled together and began to form shapes. Letters. A name. Not written, but blazing. Kamau. Zelma gasped and stumbled back, eyes wide. Kunto's face, normally hard as stone, turned pale. Her lips moved as if to say something, but no words came. Nia, frozen in place, could only watch. Her tears stopped. Her breath caught. What is that? She whispered. Kunto's voice was barely a breath. No. It cannot be. You know that name, Nia said, her eyes locked on her stepmother. You do. Who is Kamau? But Kunto said nothing. She simply turned and walked away, leaving the smoking name hanging in the air like a curse. Zelma followed, shaken, no longer wearing the smirk that usually twisted her face. The ashes slowly drifted down, settling in the coals, but the name remained in Nia's mind, etched there with searing fire. Later that day, Nia wandered the village, clutching the scorched remains of her diary's leather cover. Whispers followed her, not cruel ones this time, but odd and fearful. She was the healer's daughter. Did you hear what rose from the ashes? They say a name appeared. A name the king once banished from even being spoken. Kamau. Old men huddled near the well, whispering ancient rumors. Children stared at her, wide-eyed, as if she were suddenly made of lightning and thunder. One old woman, blind in one eye but known for speaking truth between sips of palm wine, pulled Nia aside. Her voice was gravelly but sure. That name, she said, belonged to the king's brother. Kamau. A man of justice. A prince who disappeared into exile when the throne was stolen from under him. Nia frowned. Stolen? The woman nodded. There are things this village forgets because it is easier to be quiet than to speak truth. But your mother knew stories the rest of us only dreamed. She came here not just to live. She came to protect something. Or someone. The words spun in Nia's head like a drumbeat. Kamau. Her mother. The diary. Was the book merely a record, or a key? That night, Nia sat alone beneath the stars, staring into the embers of her small fire. The remains of the diary had cooled, but the name burned in her memory. Whatever Kamau meant, whatever her mother had hidden, the world had noticed. And the world had responded. Something had begun. Something that would not stop now, not even if she ran. The ashes had spoken. And the air around her no longer felt quiet. It hummed, waiting. The days after the fire felt strange, thick with something unspoken. Though the ashes had cooled, the name they formed had not. It lingered in the minds of villagers like smoke that clung to walls long after the flame. Nia could feel the shift in the air wherever she walked, glances that followed her too long, conversations that hushed as she passed, mothers whispering warnings to children who didn't understand. But what haunted Nia most wasn't the gossip, it was the silence in her own home. Kunto avoided her entirely now, locking herself in her room at night, murmuring prayers to ancestors she hadn't acknowledged in years. Zelma tried to act as if nothing had happened, but her hands trembled when she cooked, and her eyes darted to the small gourd Nia now kept tied to her waist. Inside that gourd were the ashes, what was left of her mother's diary. She had scooped them from the hearth the moment her stepmother's back was turned. They weren't normal ashes. She knew that now. At night, she would sit by her fire, open the lid slightly, and watch as the dark grains danced as if stirred by a wind only they could feel. Sometimes they swirled into shapes, runes, symbols, once even the faint outline of a bird. Once, they formed a perfect spiral that glowed softly before collapsing back into dust. She began to wonder, were the ashes guiding her? Speaking? Nia needed answers, and no one in her household would give them. So she walked to the edge of the village, past the baobab tree, to the crumbling clay hut of old Mother Nirai. Nirai was older than most trees, it was said. Her spine bent with the weight of years and secrets. She hadn't spoken to many in months. But when Nia knocked gently on her crooked door, the old woman called her in before she even said a word. I knew you'd come, Nirai rasped, seated beside a heap of dried leaves and bones. They told me you would. Nia hesitated. Who told you? Nirai's good eye blinked slowly. The ashes. Nia's breath caught. She untied the gourd and held it out. Nirai reached with wrinkled fingers, not to take it, but to gently place a hand over it. She hummed, a low sound that resonated deep in Nia's bones. The ashes stirred. Kamau, the old woman whispered, and her voice cracked like a branch. They dare speak his name again. Who is he? Nia asked desperately. Why is my stepmother afraid? Why did the ashes show me that name? Nirai took a long, wheezing breath. Kamau was once a prince, beloved by the people, second son of the old king. He was wise, noble, chosen by the spirits for greater things. But his older brother, Damba, grew jealous. He poisoned the king's heart with lies. Said Kamau sought to steal the crown. She paused, looking deep into Nia's eyes. And so Kamau was cursed. Banished into exile. They say he disappeared into the river of secrets, but his name was forbidden. Erased. To speak it was to summon danger. Nia clenched her fists. My mother knew him, didn't she? Mirai gave a slow nod. Amma was a guardian of stories too powerful to be written. She kept them alive in other ways, songs, recipes, riddles. And yes, she knew the prince. Perhaps more than just knew. Nia felt her world tilting. Why would she hide this from me? Because truth is dangerous, Mirai said gently. And you were still a child. But now the ashes have chosen to speak. That means something is waking. On her walk home, Nia felt the weight of everything pressing against her chest. Her mother's secrets, the power of a name, the whispers of villagers, and the fear that glimmered in her stepmother's eyes. That night, she could not sleep. The gourd pulsed faintly at her side. She sat alone near the hearth, staring at the embers. Her fingers moved without thinking, lifting loose planks beneath the kitchen's edge where the wall met the floor. She didn't know why she looked there. Maybe the ashes guided her. Maybe it was her mother's spirit. But something pulled her hand toward a narrow, hidden drawer that she'd never noticed before. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, was a single page. Fragile, yellowed, but miraculously unburned. It was a map. Drawn in her mother's looping hand, marked with cryptic symbols, some of which she recognized from the ash formations. A river curved through the page like a silver serpent. At its heart, a symbol glowed faintly with what looked like pressed ash ink, a spiral within a circle. Beside it were the words. Where truth sleeps, only the brave may wake it. The river of secrets will remember Kamau. Nia's hands trembled. The path was clear now. Not easy. Not safe. But clear. Her mother hadn't left her nothing. She had left her everything. A riddle wrapped in flame and ashes, in names forgotten and forbidden. And somewhere beyond the map and the river, was Kamau. Or his legacy. Or his truth. Either way, Nia knew she was meant to find it. The stars blinked faintly above the village as Nia stood at its edge, the gourd tied securely to her sash and the map folded carefully within her woven pouch. Her eyes lingered on the mud brick huts, on the baobab tree that had watched her grow, and on the distant silhouettes of people who had never truly seen her. With one final breath, she turned and stepped beyond the well-worn paths, into the forest that few dared to enter. The air changed instantly, heavier, older. Even the trees seemed to lean closer, as if listening. The gourd at her side vibrated gently, like a heartbeat. The map had pointed her northeast, toward lands whispered about in fireside tales but never spoken of in daylight. She didn't know how far the river of secrets lay, only that her feet were meant to find it. By the time dawn stretched gold fingers across the land, Nia was tired, hungry, and already doubting herself. She hadn't expected the path to be easy, but neither had she realized how loud silence could be when it surrounded you completely. No village sounds. No market chatter. Just the hum of insects and the occasional sharp crack of branches shifting behind her. Then came the boy. She had paused at a stream to fill her calabash when a small voice said, "If you're looking for ghosts, you're heading the right way." She spun around, startled, hand reaching for the walking stick she'd carved herself. A boy stood not far off, barefoot, no older than 10 or 11. His clothes were patchy, his face sun-darkened, and a leather sling dangled from one shoulder. But his eyes, sharp, amused, watched her like he already knew what she carried. "Who are you?" she asked warily. "Teo," he said with a shrug. "I live, wherever the wind stops." "You?" "Nia," she replied, still tense. "I'm traveling alone." "I noticed. You look like someone who packed for a day and ended up walking into forever." She hesitated. "I have food." His ears perked. "And stories?" "Maybe." Teo grinned. "Then I'll be your guide. I know these woods better than the roots do. For a mango and a tail, I'll show you the safest paths." Nia stared at him a moment longer, then slowly opened her pouch. She handed him half a dried mango slice and said, "Deal." They walked together through forests where the trees grew thicker, darker. The map helped, but it was Teo who pointed out which paths to avoid, which bushes whispered danger, and how to speak softly near the termite mounds that housed spirits with jealous ears. At night, by the fire, he demanded stories. Nia told him about the ashes and the name Kamau. He didn't laugh or scoff. Instead, he nodded like it made perfect sense. My grandmother used to say the world forgets its heroes, but the land never does, he said. Maybe the land's been waiting for you. Their bond deepened with every mile. When they reached the haunted bend, where trees bent like old men in pain and monkeys perched silently in high branches watching them with glassy eyes, Teo whispered, "Don't look them in the eye. They echo your thoughts. If you think of fear, they'll grow teeth." They moved in silence. One monkey mirrored their steps from above, its fur white as bone, its eyes blank. Nia forced herself not to think of her mother's grave, of the fire, of the name in the ash. She thought instead of cool water, mango trees, and laughter. The monkey blinked, yawned, and vanished. Only once they passed the bend and reached a quiet glade did they dare speak again. "You didn't flinch once," Teo said, clearly impressed. "I was too scared to flinch," Nia admitted with a smile. 2 nights later, they saw the river. It shimmered under the moonlight, wide and slow, its surface mirror-smooth and oddly quiet, too quiet. There were no frogs croaking, no insects buzzing. Just silence and water that looked more like liquid glass than any river Nia had ever seen. "The river of secrets," Teo whispered. They approached cautiously. At the riverbank stood a solitary stone shaped like an open eye. Nia crouched and dipped a hand into the cool water. Nothing happened. Then the ashes stirred in her gourd. She quickly opened it. A thin trail of ash floated up and hovered just above the water. It curled and spun until it formed a single word on the river's surface: "Speak." Teo stepped back. Nia took a breath, and with her heart pounding, she said, "My name is Nia, daughter of Amma, the healer." The water trembled. A small ripple broke the surface. And then, images began to form within it. She saw her mother, younger, standing at a great court adorned in gold and cloth. She was holding hands with a tall man whose face Nia couldn't see clearly. His voice echoed across the river in fragments. "If they learn you've hidden the child, they will kill her. She must never know until the ashes choose to speak. Kamau's blood must survive, even if I do not." Nia's heart thundered. "What is this?" Teo asked, awestruck. "I think that was Kamau. And my mother. Before I was born." "You're not just her daughter," Teo whispered. "You're his too." The water stilled. Nia stared at her reflection, her own face, the same one she'd always known, now suddenly echoing with history, power, and danger. Her voice came out hollow. "I'm the daughter of the forgotten prince." The river whispered once more, so soft it could have been the wind. "Then you must awaken what was buried." Nia looked at Teo. "We're not done." He nodded solemnly. "I figured that when the ashes started spelling names." With the river of secrets behind them and truths blooming in the dark like unseen flowers, Nia and Teo stepped forward. The path ahead was unknown. But no longer were they simply searching. Now, they were returning, carrying bloodlines and buried fire into a world that had tried to forget them. Nia stood knee-deep in the river of secrets, the cool current flowing gently around her legs like a memory reaching out to touch the present. The sky above was cloudless, the moon casting a silver shimmer across the water. In her hands, she held the gourd of ashes, what remained of the diary, of her mother's secrets, and of the fire that changed everything. Teo stood quietly at the bank, watching. Neither of them spoke. With reverent hands, Nia opened the gourd and let the ashes fall, grain by grain, into the river. The effect was immediate. The water rippled outward in concentric circles, glowing softly at first, then brighter, until the entire river before her shimmered like liquid starlight. The current ceased. Time seemed to still. Then the river began to reveal. The water bent upward into a thin veil of mist, and within it, images swirled, memories preserved in spirit. Nia gasped as she saw her mother, younger and adorned in elegant cloths embroidered with gold threads, her hands glowing with healing light. Amma stood beside a young man, tall, broad-shouldered, with kind but determined eyes. His presence carried weight, yet he smiled like someone who had not yet tasted betrayal. His name formed in the mist, Kamau. They were in a lush palace garden, surrounded by trees heavy with fruit and singing birds. Kamau winced as Amma laid a healing palm on his chest. "This poison," he said weakly. "My brother means to destroy me slowly." "You must be careful," Amma warned. Obaid's jealousy festers. "You must not drink nor eat what passes through his court." Kamau looked down. He was not always like this. "No," Amma agreed. But power changed him. And now the spirits whisper of a curse, one that stains the bloodline if left unbroken. The scene shifted. Now Amma knelt before a shrine deep within the palace, chanting softly, mixing herbs and ash. Behind her, soldiers approached. She fled before they could reach her, clutching something to her belly. The images grew darker. Obaid, now wearing the royal mantle, stood in the throne room with cold eyes. "She's betrayed the kingdom," he snarled. "She carries the child of a traitor." Another vision, Amma in exile, hiding in a small, remote village. She had just given birth. Her face was tired, but her eyes were fierce with protection. "They'll never find you," she whispered to the infant. "You are hope reborn. My Nia." The mist thinned for a moment, as if the river itself needed to breathe. Nia's hands were shaking. "All this time, I thought I was just the daughter of a village healer." Teo stepped forward slowly. "But you're the daughter of the prince's protector. And maybe more." More scenes bloomed in the mist, glimpses of Kamau wandering in exile, his spirit fading into legend. Amma writing by candlelight, sealing pages with symbols of protection. A diary. The very one that had been burned. Then came the moment that gripped Nia's chest the tightest, Amma speaking directly into the mirror pool, as if she knew Nia would one day see. "If you find this, my child, know that your father was not a coward. He was silenced by the one who feared him. And I, Amma, was no servant. I was chosen by the ancestors to guard his light. You carry both of us in your blood. And the world has not yet seen what burns in your name." The river dimmed. The water stilled. The ashes were gone. But in their place, Nia felt something settle within her, a weight, yes, but also a clarity. The ache of absence she had carried for years now had shape. Her mother had been more than she ever imagined, a royal healer, a protector, a defier of kings. And Kamau, whether alive or swallowed by the river, had left a legacy in her. She stepped back from the water and looked at Teo. "Obaid sits on a throne built on lies. My mother fled with truth in her womb." Teo gave a small nod. "Then the question is, what will you do with that truth now?" Nia looked east, toward the lands where the palace would lie beyond deserts and guarded paths. Her hands clenched, not in fear, but in resolve. "I'll finish what my mother started," she said quietly. "I'll bring the truth home." And the river of secrets whispered its approval, just a single ripple, then silence. The wind carried more than dust now, it carried whispers. Whispers that drifted through border towns and trading posts, from drunken mouths in night markets to trembling lips in royal corridors. "Amma's daughter lives." When the rumor reached the ears of King Obaid, it struck like a thorn into his pride. He sat on a high-backed ivory throne in the capital's great hall, the walls behind him lined with golden spears and the skulls of kings who came before. His eyes were cold as slate. "She should have died with her mother's betrayal," he muttered, voice barely above a hiss. "Kamau's blood must not be allowed to rise." One of his advisors leaned close. "We believe she carries something. A relic of Amma's. Possibly the diary." Obaid's fist curled. "I burn that past. But like embers beneath ash, it smolders." He stood slowly. "Send the shadow guard. Burn the village if you must. Silence the girl before she becomes a fire I cannot contain." Meanwhile, in the quiet marshland outside a trading town, Nia and Teo crouched beneath a grove of broadleaf trees, sharing a thin broth by firelight. Nia held the now empty gourd on her lap, though no ash remained. Still, its warmth never faded. Something had changed since the river. She felt eyes in every shadow now, not of beasts, but of men. And worse, of fate. Teo watched her with concern. "We've stayed too long. We should keep moving." She nodded. "Just one more day. I want to check on the village." But before they could move, rustling came from the edge of the grove, heavy feet, clanking metal, and voices low and cruel. "Surround the camp," one of them muttered. "Obaid wants her alive, barely." Nia grabbed Teo's hand and ran. The jungle swallowed them quickly, but not quietly. Vines slapped, roots clawed at ankles. Behind them, the shadow guard followed like smoke, silent, fast, and merciless. They darted through ravines and over stone bridges, lungs burning. As they reached a narrow path beside a cliff drop, Teo slipped. Nia caught his arm and pulled, but soldiers were closing in. Then, out of the green shadow, a blur of motion. A cloaked figure leapt from the trees, staff in hand. With a single motion, he swept two soldiers into the river gorge below. Another lunged, and the man spun, disarming him with such fluid precision that the forest seemed to lean in awe. The remaining guards hesitated, then fled into the underbrush. Nia stared, breathless. The man turned slowly. His hood fell back. He was older now, face weathered like old bark, beard silvered with age, but his eyes, they were Kamau's. The same eyes from the river's vision. Fierce and kind. Teo was the first to speak. You're him." The man said nothing at first. He studied Nia, his gaze lingering on her cheekbones, her posture, the fire in her eyes. Then his voice, low and steady, broke the silence. "I've been waiting for a sign." Nia stepped forward, stunned. "You're alive. All these years, why didn't you return?" "I returned once," Kamau said, his voice like distant thunder. "And saw what Obaid had done to our people. To Amma. If I had shown my face, there would have been war. She begged me to wait. To hide. Until the time was right." His voice cracked, just slightly. "I watched your mother disappear into the shadows for you. I've waited, for you." Nia reached into her pouch, and though the gourd was empty, she held it out to him. He placed a hand over it. The ashes, long gone, reappeared. Faint at first, then brighter, swirling upward in a halo of golden dust. Teo gasped. The ashes recognize him. Kamau's eyes widened, the light reflecting in his irises. Amma's work lives. The ash danced between them, forming symbols in the air, an old dialect, one Nia instinctively understood. The bloodline is unbroken. Rise. Nia felt something stir in her chest. Not fear. Not grief. Power. Kamau looked at her then, not just as a protector or as a memory of love lost, but as a father seeing his child walk into destiny. "You carry more than her strength," he said. "You carry mine. And now, the false king must fall." Back in the capital, a messenger returned with scorched armor and trembling limbs. She escaped. With help. The jungle swallowed us whole. Obaid slammed his fist against the throne arm. Then I will burn the jungle. I will smoke out every last whisper of Kamau. He turned to Zelmine Kunto, who stood waiting in the shadows behind the throne, freshly paid in coin. Find her again. Or your blood will pay the price for your incompetence. Zelma's eyes flickered, not with guilt, but with something deeper, the fear of what she could not control anymore. For in the farthest reaches of the jungle, among trees older than kings, a daughter of fire and exile had found her father. And the ashes were no longer silent. They were rising. Night fell like a curtain, thick and trembling with tension, as Nia followed Kamau and Teo into the heart of the jungle. Here, where vines hung like ancient curtains and the air was heavy with spirit song, a forgotten shrine lay buried beneath centuries of moss and memory. Kamau stepped forward, hands trembling slightly, not with fear, but reverence. He reached out to part the vines covering a stone archway, revealing a path lit by bioluminescent mushrooms that pulsed like breath. "This," he said, "is where your mother brought me before she fled. This is where the ancestors rest, and where the drum of judgment lies." Nia blinked at the word. "A drum?" He nodded. "Not just any drum. It is a relic carved from the bark of the ancestor tree, its hide made from the skin of a lion that walked between worlds. It only answers to one whose blood carries the truth unbroken, your mother's blood." "Yours." Teo let out a low whistle. "No pressure." They moved through the pathway until they reached a sunken circle of stone. In the center stood a pedestal, and upon it, covered in layers of ceremonial cloth, rested the drum. Nia approached slowly, heart pounding. She could feel it calling, not to her ears, but her spirit. As if the very ground beneath her feet was exhaling after centuries of holding its breath. Kamau knelt. "You must strike it 3 times. Not with force, but with truth. Each beat must come from your soul." Nia swallowed and knelt before the drum. She unwrapped the cloth, revealing with the color of bloodstone and carvings that shimmered even without light. She lifted her hands. The first beat fell. Boom! A shockwave rippled through the grove. The wind rose. Trees bent backward. Suddenly, she heard voices, not from outside, but from within. 100 tongues speaking her name. Some were angry. Some mournful. All powerful. "She is awake." Nia gasped but steadied herself. The second beat fell. Boom! Lightning cracked across the sky, though the clouds had not yet gathered. The earth quivered beneath her knees. Far away in the capital, crops withered suddenly under the sun, and wells began to dry. King Obaid stood on his balcony that very moment, clutching his chest. What is this trembling? Why do the shadows speak? Back in the shrine, Nia trembled as the final beat neared. Her palms burned. Her veins felt lit with fire. Teo took a step toward her, worried. "Nia, are you all right?" "I'm not sure," she whispered. "But I have to finish this." The third beat fell. Boom! This time, the sky itself responded. Thunder answered thunder. Rain fell in reverse, dancing upward for a moment before crashing down. The earth moaned, not in pain, but in judgment. And then, from the shadows, she stepped forth. Amma. Nia's mother appeared not in flesh, but in spirit. A glowing silhouette with eyes like warm fire and a smile lined with sadness and pride. "My daughter," Amma whispered. "You carry our truth now." Nia sobbed as her mother reached out. Their hands touched, spirit to skin, and a flood of visions filled her mind. She saw the night Amma fled the palace, carrying both her child and her last hope. She saw the healing rites pass through generations, locked in blood. She saw the ancestors, warriors, midwives, kings, seers, standing in a circle, waiting for this day. And more than that, she felt them enter her. When she opened her eyes again, Nia was glowing faintly. The trees around her leaned inward, listening. Kamau looked at her in awe. "It's begun. You've awakened the land." All across the kingdom, changes began to stir. Grass grew where drought had ruined it, but only in places that had not pledged loyalty to Obaid. Trees whispered secrets in the ears of rebels. The river that had run dry in the north overflowed, but avoided Obaid's palace completely, rerouting itself like a creature fleeing rot. And in the capital, whispers turned into murmurs. Murmurs into talk. Talk into unrest. People began to ask, why does the rain avoid the king's fields? Why do the birds fly away when he walks? Obaid roared in fury at the court. Who drums against me? But no one answered. For in the jungle, Nia sat before the ancient drum, its final echo still vibrating in her chest. She looked to Kamau, who had tears in his eyes. You've done what I couldn't, he whispered. You've awakened more than the drum, you've awakened the kingdom. Teo sat beside her, silent, watching the sky shift from storm to starlight. The power wasn't just in the drum. It was in her. And now, the land remembered. The truth had a rhythm. And it was rising. The sun rose over the horizon like a golden drumbeat itself, casting warm light across the road that led to the capital, the path once cursed by silence now humming with the quiet fire of destiny. Nia, cloaked in a simple traveler's wrap, rode beside Kamau on a cart pulled by an old ox. Teo walked behind them, eyes sharp, a dagger hidden in his sash. The capital's annual Festival of Kings loomed just ahead, a day when commoners could step into the royal square and speak freely before the throne. It was tradition, a relic from the old days when kings were held accountable by the voice of the people. Kamau had waited years for this moment. Nia had been born for it. In her satchel were two things, the drum of judgment and the gourd of ashes, no longer inert, now glowing faintly from within, pulsing with the heartbeat of 100 truths. As they passed through a market town checkpoint, a figure stepped forward dressed in the crimson robes of a traveling priestess. She wore beads around her neck and the symbol of a moon on her brow. It was Zelma. Her eyes locked on Nia with practiced warmth, but underneath, poison. She bowed, offering a bowl of blessing water. "Young traveler," she said sweetly. "Blessings upon your journey. The king's festival welcomes all, but only the righteous may enter with clean hearts. Drink, and let the ancestors guide you." Kamau moved, but Nia stopped him. She took the bowl, smelled it. Beneath the mint and spice, she recognized a root her mother once warned about, a rare herb that paralyzed breath before pain could be felt. Nia locked eyes with Zelma. "The ancestors already walk with me." And with a smooth, practiced motion, she poured the water out onto the priestess's sandals. Zelma's mask cracked, just for a second. "The king will never hear you," she hissed under her breath as Nia passed. "No," Nia replied, voice cool. "He'll hear all of us." The city gates yawned wide before them. The palace was draped in banners of red and gold. The courtyard brimmed with people from all over the kingdom, farmers, dancers, soldiers, merchants. All had come to offer thanks or grievances, laughter or curses, whatever the spirit demanded on this day of truth. Obaid sat on his throne, a golden crown atop his brow, his face carved from stone. Behind him loomed guards, ministers, and a growing sense of unease. For the land still refused him. Nia, Kamau, and Teo stepped forward in line, their names unspoken, their cloaks still hiding who they were. But the moment Nia approached the royal platform, the drum on her back let out a soft thump, unstruck, yet alive. Obaid's eyes narrowed. Nia reached the front of the line, her voice steady. "I wish to speak before the king." The crowd fell into an expectant hush. The guards moved to block her, but the oldest among them paused. His eyes landed on Kamau, and a flicker of recognition flashed across his face. He stepped back, allowing them forward. Nia walked into the circle. Obaid leaned forward. "You may speak, girl. But be warned, slander is punishable by death, even today." "I do not bring slander," she said, unslinging the drum. "I bring truth." She struck the drum once. Boom. The sky darkened. The wind shifted. Then she opened the gourd. The ashes rose, swirling upward in a silent dance, glowing brighter, faster, until they formed a face. A man's face. Familiar. Strong. Grieved, but alive. "Kamau." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A child dropped their toy. An old woman covered her mouth. Ministers leaned forward. Even the birds on the palace roof went still. Obaid stood. "No," he thundered. "This is trickery. Illusion." But Kamau stepped forward now, hood gone. "No illusion, Obaid. You stole my throne. You cursed me, exiled me. But truth never forgets its name." The ashes spun into words. "He is not the king." The crowd surged with shouts. Obaid reached for his sword. But it was too late. The drumbeat had begun, and the kingdom had heard it. Gasps still echoed in the courtyard as Kamau stood tall, the ashes swirling around him like living mist. The face they had formed had already spoken, but now it was his voice, deep, resonant, familiar to some and long lost to most, that filled the space like thunder before a storm. "I am Kamau," he declared, raising his chin, "the rightful heir. Son of King Jabari. Betrayed by my own blood. Hidden by the grace of a healer, Amma, mother to Nia. And today, I return not with vengeance, but with truth." The crowd rippled with disbelief and awe. Some began to murmur confirmations. A few elders whispered, remembering the young prince who had vanished like a rumor swallowed by wind. But King Obaid's laughter rang sharp above it all. "You return with tricks and tales?" Obaid spat, stepping forward, his robe bristling with gold and arrogance. "This is a child's performance. You are a coward wrapped in myth." But then, the ashes stirred again. They swirled faster, rising from the gourd that still sat open in Nia's hands. This time, they shimmered not into a face, but into a small, ancient emblem, the seal of the House of Jabari, shaped like a lion with a crown of flame. Gasps turned into cries as the emblem floated in the air, hovered, and then with sudden force, it hurtled toward Kamau's chest, where it landed and burned against his skin. He grimaced but did not cry out. When he looked down, the seal glowed through his tunic, refusing to fade. Even the guards faltered. The Queen Mother, standing behind Obaid, let out a strangled sound and collapsed to her knees. Her hand covered her mouth as tears leaked from her eyes. "My boy," she whispered. "My son." The court froze. Kamau looked at her, not with anger, but sorrow. "You knew," he said softly. "You knew he sent me away." She could not deny it. Her silence said everything. Obaid's calm shattered. "Lies. Sorcery," he roared, yanking his sword from its jeweled sheath. "You think this kingdom will kneel for parlor tricks and dead men's whispers?" He raised his blade, not at Kamau, but at Nia. She did not flinch. She held her ground, the ashes now spiraling protectively around her like smoke shielding flame. Obaid lunged. But before his blade could fall, the air grew thick. Heavy. Alive. The wind howled. The sky dimmed. And then came the spirits. One by one, figures stepped from the shadows of the palace columns and tree-lined walls, ghostly but solid, cloaked in translucent fire and bone-beaded robes. They moved as one, their feet not quite touching the ground. Men, women, warriors, midwives, healers. Ancestors. Obaid's arm froze in place mid-swing. His face twisted in terror as the sword trembled in his hand, then dropped with a clang. The spirits did not speak, but their presence screamed judgment louder than words. The wind carried 1,000 voices, whispering, "Justice, justice, justice." Kamau stepped forward and took Nia's hand. She turned to face the crowd, voice steady and full of truth. "You burned the past," she said, staring directly at Obaid, "but truth lives even in ashes. You tried to silence the bloodline, but it sings louder than ever." Obaid dropped to his knees, gasping as the weight of centuries bore down on him. "I was the king," he rasped. "No," Kamau said, standing tall beside Nia. "You were the shadow. But now the sun rises." The drum beat once, on its own. Boom. The sound echoed for miles. The people bowed, not out of fear, but in reverence. The guards laid down their weapons. The palace trembled as if the stones themselves had waited years to exhale. The false king had been unmasked. And the truth, risen from ashes, now wore a crown. The courtyard was silent in the early morning, bathed in gold and promise. For the first time in many years, the palace gates had opened not to war or deceit, but to peace and renewal. Kamau stood at the top of the palace steps, clothed in royal robes not made of jewels but of tradition, earth-toned, embroidered with the symbol of the lion and flame, the emblem that had once risen from the ashes to mark him as king. The drum of judgment stood behind him, its surface quiet but ready. The people bowed as one. A royal scribe stepped forward to speak the formal decree, his voice echoing through the sun-warmed square. By the word of the ancestors and the will of truth, Kamau, son of Jabari, is hereby reinstated as rightful king of Itoro. The cheer that erupted shook the leaves from the tallest trees. No trumpets were needed, the people were the music. Nia stood beside Kamau, not as royalty, but as something older, deeper. In her hands, she held the sealed gourd of ashes, now inscribed with golden runes. She wore the healer's robe once worn by her mother Amma, modified to fit her frame, but rich with the same sacred energy. Across the square, bound in chains of ceremonial silence, stood Obaid. His eyes burned with prideful defiance, but his lips were sealed by the same magic he had once tried to exploit. The ancestors had judged him, not with death, but with a punishment harsher to a man who prized power above all, irrelevance. He was to be banished, alone, into the quiet lands beyond the kingdom. There, his voice would never be heard again. Kamau stepped forward and faced his brother for the final time. "You were king," he said. "But not just of a throne. You ruled fear, you ruled silence, you ruled forgetting. That ends today." Obaid didn't speak. He couldn't. He turned and walked slowly down the road, his shadow long and thin in the morning light. Nia watched, her heart neither light nor heavy. Just clear. Near the outer gates, Zelma and Kunto were held in ceremonial custody, not chained, but publicly disgraced. Their luxurious clothes had been stripped for simple garments, and their faces bore the color of ash and regret. Kamau turned to Nia. "What should be done with them?" The crowd waited. Nia stepped forward, slowly. Zelma flinched, expecting rage. Kunto could not meet her gaze. "You tried to erase me," Nia said softly, "as you erased my mother. You feared what I might become. You burned the diary, but you could not burn what was written in me." Zelma looked down, mouth trembling. "I could call for punishment," Nia continued, "but then I'd become what you wanted me to be, broken, bitter, hardened by fire." She looked around, eyes sweeping the gathered faces. "I offer you no status, no place beside me. But I do offer you this forgiveness. Not for your sake, but for mine. Because I walk forward. And you can remain behind." Zelma sobbed silently as Nia turned and walked away, not once looking back. Later that day, the coronation feast was held in the Garden of Rain, a sacred grove where water never stopped falling from the rocks, where green things always grew. Kamau sat on his new throne, one made of carved wood and obsidian, not gold. Beside him sat Elda Mawusi, who had once told Nia the truth of Kamau's name. On Kamau's other side, a new seat had been placed, not for a queen, but for the healer. Nia. They called her Daughter of Ashes now, not as a curse, but as a title. She had risen from ruin, carried truth in her hands, and changed the kingdom not through war, but wisdom. As the sun began to set, Nia walked to the palace archive, a room carved into the roots of the great baobab tree that stood at the center of the city. She placed the ash gourd onto a pedestal of stone, beneath a glass dome etched with the phrase, "Let ashes remember what mouths forget." Behind her, children played in the hallways, laughing, leaping, unburdened by the grief their parents had carried. In the quiet, one small girl tiptoed up to her. Bright eyes, thick braids, curiosity dancing on her face. "Lady Nia?" "Yes, little one." The girl leaned closer, whispering as though sharing a conspiracy. "Did the ashes really speak?" Nia bent to her level, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. "They did more than speak," she said gently. "They remembered. And they waited, so one day, someone brave enough would listen." The child beamed, skipping off. Nia turned back to the gourd and laid one hand on the glass dome. From within, a soft glow flickered, briefly, warmly, then faded. The past had spoken. The future was listening. And the healer's line had begun again.